Hello wrestling fans. Welcome back to the $20 million Pro Wrestle Machine studio and welcome back to the show. Through the use of the Pro Wrestle Machine. August 11, 1997 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. Summerslam 1997 Report. Austin Tombstone of Doom. Tons more. By Observer staff. There were quite a number of major themes to the WWF SummerSlam pay-per-view show on August 3 from the Continental Airlines Arena in East Rutherford, New Jersey. There was an injury that appeared to be major at the time involving the WWF's hottest star, Steve Austin, which wound up with Austin hospitalized after his arms and legs went numb in the middle of his match with Owen Hart, where he was scheduled to win the IC title. The two did an impromptu and totally unconvincing finish after Austin feared his neck was broken and was paralyzed from the waist down for several seconds and whispered to Hart that he couldn't move after taking a tombstone piledriver with his head too low. Hart stalled for as long as he could, trying to get a USA chant going to chanting Canada, and with major concern all over his face, tried to stall waiting for Austin to recover. Austin managed to roll toward him, using almost only his stomach muscles, and got his arms up for a weak schoolboy finish, ending the match some 6 to 8 minutes early. Apparently the original finish was for Austin to win using his Stone Cold Stunner. The weak finish was explained on television as Hart having sympathy for a beaten opponent, and that's why he was stalling so long after Austin was obviously injured. Austin could barely get up after the match, limped with his left leg dangling out of the ring where he almost collapsed after getting backstage, and was rushed to the emergency room at Meadowlands Hospital where he was released at about 1 a.m., having apparently suffered a stinger in his neck, an injury more common in football. Austin had been having some legitimate neck problems earlier in the week stemming from the constant aggravation his neck has taken from wrestling. Austin appeared at Raw the next night but clearly wasn't walking well, with his activity limited to doing an interview and interfering in the Dude Love vs. Owen Hart main event by hitting Hart with a Slammy Award leading to Love's victory. We haven't heard any long-term prognosis when it comes to Austin other than we're told that it's possible he could be back in action this coming weekend, but the most likely situation is he'll be out for a few weeks. The original plan for the Raw main event was for Shawn Michaels to solidify his heel turn by costing Austin and Love the tag team titles, which would revert back to Owen and Davey Boy Smith. Instead, Michaels solidified his turn by doing a total heel interview. There was the main event, where Michaels began the heel turn by accidentally hitting Undertaker with a chair as Bret Hart ducked, leading to Hart capturing the WWF title for a record-tying 5th time. Hulk Hogan was the only other wrestler in WWF history with 5 title reigns. Neither Hogan nor the 5th time tying the record were mentioned in the commentary or storyline leading up to the match or after the match for the obvious political reasons, although Jim Ross did mention at one point during the show that the first WWF show at the Meadowlands was in 1981 headlined by Bruno Sammartino vs. George Steele, which for history buffs, was at the time billed as Sammartino's retirement match. And there was the crowd, 20,213 strong, 17,361 paying $523,154 along with a whopping $202,500 in merchandise sales, selling out about 1 week in advance. The show broke pro wrestling records in all 3 categories at the former Meadowlands Arena, with the previous records set at the August 28, 1989 SummerSlam event of 17,202 paying $326,658 for a show headlined by Hulk Hogan and Brutus Beefcake vs. Zeus and Randy Savage. The gate will be the second largest of 1997 in North America, trailing only WrestleMania in Chicago. But overall, despite the WWF riding a major wave of momentum from the US vs. Canada angle storm, the show generally had to be considered a disappointment. The WWF's top talent and the promotion itself, Austin, Hart, and Undertaker, showed without question they were over by selling out 1 week in advance and with the generally strong house show business of late. But the crowd response from the sellout was disappointing, particularly from a live perspective. Aside from a few carefully choreographed spots during the show in the last few minutes of the Undertaker-Bret title change, there was no real heat in the building, which made the show seem unimpressive to the television viewers who were comparing it with the current industry standards, let alone the spectacular response at the recent Calgary pay-per-view show 4 weeks earlier and some of the recent Raw tapings. Some there live credited the dead crowd to the idea so many had been at the afternoon tailgate party and boozed it up heavily, and by the time the show started, they were all tapped out. There were reports of numerous fans who by midway in the show appeared to be on the verge of falling asleep because of too much partying in the hot sun before the show. Even discounting the lack of crowd reaction, the match quality wasn't good. There were far too many botched up spots and messed up finishes for a major league show. Owen Hart and Austin were on the way to doing the show stealer of a match before the injury cut them short and left the match flat, but they were the only ones who were working a great match. Bret and Undertaker, while not a bad match, was a very long match that was largely identical with all their previous matches until the finish and was certainly nothing out of the ordinary. While the storyline built well, for match quality this would have been a middle-of-the-road quality match in most of the recent pay-per-view shows. Mankind vs. Hunter Hearst Helmsley had a few spectacular spots, but overall never got serious momentum. The cage prevented the outside-the-ring spots that are usually the highlight when Mankind has a great match. But the cage didn't prevent the outside interference, which was overdone to the point of silliness when it comes to the whole gimmick of a cage match. Chyna is the only thing in Helmsley's repertoire that the crowd seems to care about, so her constant interference is something of an easy out. None of the other 4 matches were any good, and about the only moment from any of them the slightest bit memorable would have been Ken Shamrock, bleeding from the mouth, doing his caged lion routine, and he lost it and took it out on executives and former wrestling stars Pat Patterson and Gerald Briscoe and 2 referees en route to having his name chanted after a match which had to be classified as disappointing. Except for the main event, most of the finishes came off somewhat botched. Chyna did a run in one spot early in the cage match, then had to go out of the cage and do the exact same thing for the real finish. Goldust and Brian Pillman messed up their finishing sunset flip spot to the point of almost complete embarrassment. Shamrock vs. British Bulldog was technically a DQ finish for Shamrock hitting Bulldog with a dog food can, cheap on its own, but so poorly explained after the fact that virtually everyone at home assumed it was an equally flat double countout finish to end what was only a fair match. The only thing positive to say about the Los Boricuas vs. DOA finish was that at least there was one, and it came about 2 minutes too late. And Owen Hart and Austin's finish, which was just a matter of one of those nightmarish moments, a momentary panic due to fear of a catastrophic injury with 20,000 people's eyes glued to them. While Austin's injury was the major one, a second apparent injury took place involving Ahmed Johnson. Johnson, recovering from recent arthroscopic knee surgery, had just gotten word earlier in the week that his recovery was behind schedule. He had been scheduled to return to the ring this coming weekend, but word late in the week was he wouldn't be able to return until early September, and like Mark Marrow, would be forced to wear a heavy knee brace. After the spot leading to the finish of the 8-man match, where Johnson was supposed to give Chains, Brian Lee, a Pearl River plunge on the floor, Johnson seemed to change his mind on the move in midair, and it came off more like a power bomb, and apparently re-aggravated the knee. They did put him in the ring at Raw the next night to do an angle where the Nation of Domination turned on him to explain his longer absence and give him an issue to return for, although even before the Nation of Domination attack, it was clear in the ring that his knee was gone. With him limited by injury and Chains limited by lack of ability, it gave the two the additional opportunity to try to set new standards for the category of awful pro wrestling. No word on when he'll return, but his first major match had been scheduled against Undertaker on the September 20th one-night-only England pay-per-view show. Undertaker also screwed up his back taking a superplex off the top rope from Hart, although he wasn't expected to miss any time from it. The show opened with a great piece chronicling the recent escapades of the 3 participants in the main event, Undertaker, Bret, and Ref Michaels. 1. Mankind Michael Foley beat Hunter Hearst Helmsley Paul Levesque in 1625 of a cage match. Helmsley tried to run away and escape immediately, thus pointing out the flaws of the WWF cage match rules. Mankind got the mandible claw on at 3 minutes, but Chyna broke it by choking him with a chain through the cage. She gave the chain to Helmsley, who then used it. Mankind made a comeback and was climbing out, but at the top Chyna gave him a crotch shot. Then, in the first spectacular spot of the match, Helmsley gave Mankind a superplex off the very top of the 8-foot cage. It wasn't as spectacular as when Hulk Hogan and Big Boss Man did the same spot during their series of cage matches in early 1989, but who else has ever tried a spot like that? Helmsley then had the opportunity to win, but changed his mind and stayed in the cage to constantly slam Mankind's head into the cage. As he tried to escape again, Mankind stopped him on the way over, holding his hair and leg. They were up there again with Mankind holding Helmsley by the ankle when Chyna climbed up and gave Mankind a forearm to break it up. Helmsley later backdropped Mankind into the cage. The heat was disappointing for all this. The two were standing on the top rope trading blows when Helmsley lost his balance and crotched himself, then landed with his ankle tied up in the ropes. Mankind tried to leave, but Chyna slammed the door on his head. Terry Gordy built an entire lucrative territory around this spot in 1982. Now it's a traditional false finish of every cage match. Chyna then attacked the ref and smashed his head into the steps and threw a chair over the cage. Helmsley went for the pedigree on the chair, but Mankind reversed it and turned it into a slingshot, sending Helmsley into Chyna, who on the other side of the cage and got nailed and took a bump to the floor.
Mankind used the double-arm DDT on the chair and the place began chanting Superfly.
The rumor had gotten out that Mankind was going to do the Jimmy Snuka splash off the top of the cage from the famous Don Morocco match circa 1983. Mankind climbed over the cage to a slight groan to those who expected that finish, then paused before hitting the bottom and climbed back up and threw his mask off. Chyna at this point ran in the ring to attempt to pull Helmsley out, but Helmsley had to tell her she was early and she left. Mankind opened his shirt, climbed to the next to the highest rung of the cage so he didn't technically come off the top, and dropped an elbow. He then climbed out, Chyna ran back in, and as Chyna frantically tried to drag Helmsley out, Mankind climbed over, winning the photo finish, and collapsed on the floor. Mankind laid on the floor until they played the Dude Love music, which revived him, and he got up and started doing the strut to the back. The match had its high spots and memorable spots, and in hindsight was very well laid out. But something was missing from the body of the match, and it wasn't just the crowd heat. 2.5 stars. New Jersey Governor Christine Todd Whitman was brought out with the Headbangers, who are from New Jersey, and Gorilla Monsoon. Wrestling must be getting a lot better reputation these days from the general public when politicians begin making public appearances on their PPVs. Monsoon gave her a title belt, calling her the champion of tax cutting. Whitman signed a bill to eliminate an entertainment tax of televised wrestling events that made it a high enough cost from taping television and pay-per-view events from New Jersey that the WWF opted not to do so until the tax was eliminated. In exchange for the tax being dropped, the WWF gave Summerslam to the big building and also scheduled a Raw taping for August 18th in Atlantic City. It had been incorrectly reported in most of the media articles, including Sports Illustrated, that no pro wrestling bouts had been held in New Jersey because of the tax, when it was only no major promotion national television tapings or pay-per-view events had been held. 2. Goldust, Dustin Runnels, pinned Brian Pillman in 7:15. Pillman looked like he nearly finished himself for good on the top rope, and getting thrown off and trying to crotch himself but mislanding and taking the ropes on the inside of the thigh before falling to the floor. Luckily he got up okay and DDT'd Goldust on the floor. Pillman also did a clothesline off the top rope, landing on both legs, which is a spot he likely wouldn't have tried a few weeks back. Goldust tried a bulldog but Pillman threw him off and Goldust went to the floor. Finish was supposed to be Goldust doing a sunset flip over the top, Pillman grabbing the ropes to avoid going over, and Marlena hitting Pillman in the face with a purse, him losing his grip on the ropes and falling backwards to be pinned. What actually happened was altogether different. Goldust went for the sunset flip, and either he didn't shoot himself far enough because of loose ropes or Pillman was too far away and he landed on Pillman's back and they both went down. Pillman kind of sat on him and it appeared the two had a brief conversation of how to get out of the mess and decided to make it the finish after all, which in hindsight was a mistake. With Pillman sitting on Goldust, they were still not in position, so they dragged themselves, keeping the position, to the ropes so Pillman could hold on and Marlena did her thing. 1/2 star. 3. Legion of Doom, Michael Hegstrand and Joe Laurinaitis beat the Godwins, Mark Canterbury and Dennis Knight, in 9:51. Godwins came out waving the rebel flag. Animal has dropped considerable weight and looked in the best shape he's been since his return and maybe the lightest he's been in his career. Pretty bad match. Lots of botched spots. Lou Albano was in the front row for the match, which was acknowledged. They got heat on Animal until Hawk's hot tag. There was no pop for the hot tag. They were about to do the double impact or doomsday device on Henry, with the announcers emphasizing it as the spot that broke Henry's neck. But Phineas made the save before they could do it. Instead they used a stuffed piledriver on Henry and Hawk pinned him. 1/2 star. Next came the $1 million segment. This came off poorly both conceptually and because of bad luck. It was never explained that there would be 100 keys to choose from and only one could open the vault, so the odds of actually giving away the $1 million were pretty safe in the WWF's favor. On TV it was certainly portrayed as if there was a good chance $1 million would be given away. To make it worse, they had to call 2 people live, and embarrassingly for them, the first number was disconnected, the second didn't answer, and while the third person watching was at home, he wasn't watching the show. How is it that Sable looks different every time you see her? 4. Davey Boy Smith retained the European title, winning via DQ against Ken Shamrock in 7:29. Shamrock bled from the mouth, apparently from a stiff clothesline. Shamrock mainly sold. Smith threw dog food on Shamrock again, which caused him to go wild. He hit Smith with the dog food can outside the ring for the DQ. In the ring, Shamrock went berserk, choking Smith out while all the officials tried to break it up. Finally he broke the hold, but not before giving Patterson, Briscoe and 2 refs a belly-to-belly suplex and walking off to a huge pop. 1 3/4 stars. 5. Los Boricuas, Juan Rivera and Jose Miguel Perez Jr. and Jesus Castillo and Jose Estrada, beat DOA, Brian Adams and Ron and Don and Brian Harris, in 9:07. It was a brawl, and not a very pretty one. For whatever reason, the bikes didn't get the big pop coming out, and you can imagine what that meant for the match.
Even though this show was from the New York market, it didn't appear Los Boricuas had any significant fan following as one would think a Puerto Rican gang would have in that market.
Nation of Domination came through the crowd at 4 minutes. The match totally fell apart at 7 minutes.
One impressive spot was Chains aka Brian Lee pressing Castillo overhead and throwing him across the ring.
Outside the ring, Chains punched Ahmed Johnson. Johnson went to give him a Pearl River plunge, but it wound up being a power bomb, as he appeared to be trying to protect his knee and ended up hurting it worse. Chains was thrown into the ring and Perez gave him an elbow drop and pinned him. They had a brief three-way after the match, but Boricuas simply left, leaving DOA and Nation of Domination to brawl. Crush got a bike and rode past the brawl, both coming and going, trying to give the impression he was going to run somebody over with the bike. 1/2 star. 6. Steve Austin Steve Williams won the IC title from Owen Hart in 16-16. Superheat early. Hart started the match working on Austin's right hand, biting it, spreading the fingers and all kinds of other gross tactics. Austin made a comeback with a stun gun, a power bomb and a clothesline over the top rope. Hart was willing to walk out to save the title, but Austin ran to the aisle and clotheslined him from behind. In the ring, Hart took control once again with a belly-to-belly and a neck breaker. Hart, who totally dominated the match since he was supposed to be doing a clean job at the end, worked on Austin's neck, and they acknowledged in the commentary Austin had a previous neck injury. The two began trading near falls and picking up the action, including Austin getting a near fall on a roll through from a crossbody. Hart used a German suplex for a near fall and put on a camel clutch. Austin broke it, but Hart hit a DDT for a near fall.
They traded sleeper holds, with Austin using a jawbreaker to get out of Hart's.
Hart then reversed an Austin move and dropped him in a tombstone piledriver when Austin was injured. At this point, Hart tried to stall for time until Austin could maneuver his way into doing a quick finish, which flattened the match out. These two were having by far the best match on the show before the injury cut the match short. 2 3/4 stars. 7. Bret Hart regained the WWF title, pinning Undertaker, Mark Calloway, in 28:09.
Bret's facial expressions are incredible, particularly the combination disdain and sadness he appeared to show at the live crowd when they booed and cheered the Canadian national anthem.
Bret gained the early advantage, jumping Undertaker at the bell with the belt. Hart's shoulder hit the post, but Undertaker clotheslined the post following up on it. Hart whipped Undertaker into the ring steps. As Hart came off the apron, Undertaker caught him and smashed his back into the ring post twice and followed with a backbreaker. Hart came back working on Undertaker's left knee. Paul Bearer came out.
Undertaker got out of the ring and attacked him, but it allowed Hart to come from behind with a chop block and continue to work the knee.
Hart used the figure 4 around the post until Michaels threatened to DQ him.
Overall, Michaels did a phenomenal job as referee, both in building his own character for the finish and also being credible in the role of referee at the same time. Owen Hart and Pillman came out.
Bret continued to work the knee until Undertaker ran out and attacked Owen and Pillman.
Michaels ran out of the ring and began arguing with both. While in the ring, Undertaker choke-slammed Hart, but Michaels wasn't there to make the count. At this point, Undertaker grabbed Michaels and began arguing with him. Bret used a schoolboy for a near fall and Undertaker went after Michaels again, building to the finish.
Hart began working over Undertaker's back and used his trademark spots like the suplex and the forearm drop, but there was no pop at all for the near falls, as if the crowd simply didn't believe these moves work on Undertaker. Finally, Hart hit the leg sweep and put on the sharpshooter, but Undertaker grabbed Hart by the throat.
He went for the choke slam, but Hart broke it with a kick. Undertaker made a comeback, barely selling the leg at all, with punches, a flying clothesline and the Hogan trademark foot to the face and leg drop, which Hart symbolically kicked out of. Undertaker then choke slammed Hart from the apron to the middle of the ring for another near fall. He went for his rope walk spot, but Hart tripped him up and Undertaker crotched himself. They went for a superplex spot, although that was clumsy in that Undertaker tripped and lost his balance the first time, and they had to try the spot a second time, on which Undertaker hurt his back legit on the bump. Hart went for the sharpshooter, and Undertaker became the first person to break the hold, kicking Hart out of the ring. Hart was mouthing the F word throughout the match and did again here. Hart then put the sharpshooter on around the post, but Undertaker broke that as well, and in doing so, knocked Hart onto Michaels on the floor. Michaels started selling his knee.
While Michaels was hobbling, Hart took a chair and hit Undertaker with it and motioned for Michaels to make the count, but Undertaker kicked out. Hart and Michaels began arguing, particularly when Michaels noticed the chair at the ring. He started screaming at Hart if he'd used the chair, and finally Hart spit in his face.
Michaels then swung the chair at Hart, which theoretically would have had he hit him in the end of both in the United States.
Hart ducked and the chair hit Undertaker.
Michaels then counted the pin and stormed off.
3 stars.
The results of the first experiment are in, and it looks as though we are in for a lot of 3-hour-long nitros. The 100th edition of Nitro, August 4th from Auburn Hills, Michigan, headlined by Lex Luger winning the WCW title from Hulk Hogan by submission with the torture rack in 11:25, drew a record-setting 4.34 rating, 4.13 first hour, 4.25 seconds hour, 4.65 third hour, and 7.39 share. It's generally expected that Hogan will regain the title on the August 9th pay-per-view show, since the promotion is being built around a Hogan vs. Sting title match at Starrcade after a Hogan vs. Roddy Piper cage title match at Halloween Havoc.
The old Nitro record was set August 26, 1996 from Palmetto, Florida for an unopposed show when Raw was preempted that did a 4.3 rating and 7.2 share with Sting and Lex Luger vs. Chris Benoit and Steve McMichael as the main event. As a live show, the total crowd of 17,616 fans at the Palace would have been the second largest in company history, trailing the record-setting 18,003 fans at the Fleet Center in Boston on June 9, as was the live gate of $240,519. The Boston set company record is $243,946. It was basically a sellout, in that all the tickets originally planned to be sold were gone a few days ahead of time, but on the day of the show they opened up obstructed view seating, some of which went unsold, so it wasn't a turnaway crowd.
The only reason the gate record wasn't broken is because the show had 4,258 comp tickets. The paid attendance was 13,356. Boston record was 16,025, which was somewhere near the top in company history as well.
As would be expected, with a replay now starting immediately after the live show ends, it also set a record doing a 2.31 rating and an incredible 6.58 share for a replay show. Since a 2-hour show would have the replay start at a more favorable 10 p.m. time slot, that rating record likely won't last more than a week or two, although the share record is going to be tough to beat. Nitro's first hour whipped the debuting Walker Texas Rangers series on USA, which did a 2.3, by nearly 2 full points. Raw moved back 1 hour, did slightly higher than it had been averaging in the old slot, with a 2.66 rating, 2.60 first hour, 2.73 seconds hour, and 4.36 share, although whatever minuscule gain from the average it would have been is likely more due to curiosity stemming from angles at Summerslam than the new time slot being a positive.
For Raw and Nitro combined between 9 p.m. and 11 p.m., the total rating was 7.11 and an 11.86 share, meaning a total of 5,065,000 total homes. That share figure is phenomenal because it shows just how mainstream pro wrestling really is at this point.
It's the first time the 5 million homes barrier had even been broken when it comes to viewing pro wrestling at one time in the history of cable television. Virtually all the NBC specials in the WWF's heyday drew far larger audiences than the combined audience of both these shows. That destroyed by a full 13% the all-time record combined rating of 6.27, 4,470,000 homes, set the previous week. However, the Hogan-Luger match, 3,614,000 homes, fell short of the Hogan-Flair record set on the August 24, 1994 Clash of the Champions, 4,126,000 homes, as the most watched match in the history of cable television. From a show quality standpoint, WCW easily won the week, although largely by default as WWF offered little more than Sergeant Slaughter, an explanation as to the physical condition of Steve Austin, and the mental condition of Shawn Michaels. The WWF's matches, with the exception of Brian Christopher vs. Takamichi Inoku, ranged from bad to really bad. Granted, the 3 hours of WCW seemed at times like an endurance test more than a wrestling show, but the viewer patterns with the ratings generally growing throughout the 3 hours tells the important story. Viewers stayed with the show and grew with it, through the teases for the Steiner surprise, Sting being offered a contract, and the Hogan-Luger match with Luger guaranteeing victory. The general pro wrestling rule is if a babyface either guarantees victory or swears to God that he's going to win, then he's either going to win or he's going to turn heel.
The overall wrestling in WCW ranged from very good short matches, Jarrett and Malenko vs. Chavo, and Hector Guerrero and Chris Benoit vs. Six, a heated world title change that offered little in regard to wrestling but had been built up great and featured an awesome post-match textbook example of how to get a title belt back over. Average wrestling with big names, Flair vs. Page. Solid wrestling with no names, Villanos vs. Garza and Lizmark. And bad wrestling regardless of names, Public Enemy vs. Voltage, Barbarian vs. Wrath, Silver King and Damien vs. Ernest Miller and Glacier. WCW, with no first-hour opposition, started strong at 4.0 for the Hogan interview with Curt Hennig vs. Mortis match and stayed in the 4.1-4.2 until 9:45 p.m. when a combination of Silver King and Damien vs. Glacier and Ernest Miller and a J.J. Dillon Eric Bischoff confrontation drew a 4.6. WWF started at 2.6 for the Hart Foundation opening interview and introduction of Sergeant Slaughter, stayed that way with Ken Shamrock vs. Kama Mustafa, and grew to 2.8 for Michinoku vs. Christopher and Helmsley vs. Vader. While WCW grew to 4.6 at 9:45 to 10 p.m., WWF fell to 2.4 for Patriot vs. Sultan and Patriot/Bret Hart angle. WWF's one surge was the 3.2 for the Michaels interview, while WCW actually dropped down to a 4.2 for Flair vs. Page. The Hogan-Luger title switch did 4.9, which also included the angle where Sting was offered the contract by Dillon, and 5.2 quarters respectively, while WWF consistently fell in the second hour after the Michaels interview, with a 2.5, Godwins vs. Headbangers and Pillman in a dress, and 2.4, Owen Hart vs. Dude Love, closing the show. On the replay, NITROS still held up to a 2.15 rating and 8.95 share between 1:30 and 2 a.m. for the replay of the Hogan-Luger match. The WWF pulled something of a bait and switch, which may have hurt it from a letdown factor in the final half hour, since they did the show opening angle building toward an Owen vs. Steve Austin match, and plugged it as the main event throughout the show, before making the switch to Dude Love in the last half hour, citing Austin's legit injury. New Japan's answer to March Madness, the 7th annual G1 Climax tournament every August at Tokyo Sumo Hall, ended with Kensuke Sasaki as the winner, Hiroyoshi Tenzan as the rising star and MVP, and Masahiro Chono in the hospital. Sasaki, whose first G1 tournament win and overall biggest career win to this point, took place one day before his 31st birthday, at a first-round bye, and then became the ultimate NWO buster by being put over Marcus Bagwell in the second round on August 2nd, and both Scott Norton in the semifinals and Tenzan in the finals on August 3rd. Tenzan, who along with Satoshi Kojima was also legitimately injured over the 3 hard-fought days, was put over IWGP Heavyweight Champion Shinya Hashimoto in the semifinals, where he suffered a knee injury which initial reports are should require arthroscopic surgery. However, due to the storyline, combined with the injury to Chono, Tenzan came out for the finals and won't be missing any action, losing to Sasaki's Lariat and Northern Lights Bomb, his wife's finishing maneuver, in 8:09. Chono didn't work the third night, and reporters at the matches were told that he would be forced to undergo surgery on the ankle after all, which would be taking place this week, and would have to miss the Nagoya Dome show, where he was scheduled against Hashimoto for the IWGP Heavyweight title. This may have resulted in New Japan changing the finish of the Hashimoto vs. Tenzan match that night, as it would have been more dramatic for Sasaki to score his biggest career win against Hashimoto than against Tenzan. And from a storyline standpoint, it would make sense with Sasaki set to challenge for the IWGP title on August 31st in Yokohama. However, with New Japan needing a replacement for Chono on August 10th, Tenzan needed the credibility immediately of not only going to the finals, but scoring a clean win over Hashimoto in the G1. Tenzan scored the clean win over Hashimoto with a diving headbutt in 14:01 in what was reported as a great match, while Sasaki won his semifinal over Norton in 5:16 with the Northern Lights Bomb. The quarterfinals on August 2nd saw Sasaki beat Bagwell in a match of wrestlers with a first-round bye 8:04 with a reverse Ipponze judo hip toss. Tenzan pinned Kojima in 11:43 after a moonsault. Norton pinned Great Muta in a battle of NWO members in 6:31 with a power slam, and Hashimoto beat Chono in 5:45. The Muta-Norton match saw the two shake hands at the beginning, but Muta blew the mist in Norton's face. Muta then was beating on Norton outside the ring using objects until Bagwell washed the green out of Norton's eyes to start the comeback. Bagwell wound up fighting outside the ring against fellow NWO members Tenzan and Hiro Saito. Finish saw Muta go for a Frankensteiner off the top, but Norton held on and power slammed him for the win. Reports are that the first night was just shy of a sellout with 10,500 fans, and that the second and third shows were complete sellouts of 11,000.
The third show, a Sunday afternoon card, had been sold out for weeks in advance, with the gate the second and third night around an estimated $600,000. Chono, who had suffered a badly injured ankle delivering an atomic drop to Dusty Wolfe at WCW's worldwide tapings in Orlando, Florida 2 weeks earlier, announced he was going to work the tournament, his scheduled title match on August 10th. This also may have been initially scheduled as a title change, and he would also work the main event on New Japan August 31st show at Yokohama Arena since it was the Riki Choshu Memorial Night. The actual injuries suffered in Florida were a dislocated right ankle, torn ligaments in the ankle, and a broken heel bone. An operation was recommended by both the doctors in Florida and by the New Japan doctors when he returned, which would have put Chono out of action until November.
Chono decided not only against the operation because of the important matches on the immediate schedule, but to also work the big shows rather than take time off.
Chono worked his first round match on August 1st, getting his expected win over Michiyoshi Ohara in 1839 of what was said to have been a very dramatic match due to Ohara's working on Chono's left ankle. However, apparently it was during this match that the injury was re-aggravated. In the second round, he faced Hashimoto. On the house mic, Chono challenged Hashimoto not to attack his bad leg so as to not make it a handicap match. Chono opened by kicking the hell out of Hashimoto using a special shoe to protect the injury. Hashimoto sold it like he was knocked out in the ring. In apparent desperation, Hashimoto went after the bad leg. This saw the rest of the NWO, Tenzan, Norton, Bagwell, and Hiro Saito hit the ring, and several New Japan wrestlers hit the ring for a brawl.
This allowed Chono to attack Hashimoto and use his favorite STF, but Hashimoto made the ropes. Hashimoto made the big comeback, using a standing ankle lock before the referee stopped the match in just 5:45.
New Japan held a press conference on August 4th to officially announce Tenzan as Hashimoto's opponent for the Nagoya Dome. Since New Japan couldn't get any major last-minute help from WCW to fill the slot, not that there's anyone in WCW who would mean a lot except possibly Norton, since he has 2 pins earlier this year against Hashimoto challenging for the IWGP title,
because the Road Wild pay-per-view make it impossible for anyone on that show to work Nagoya. They didn't make an announcement regarding the main event on August 31st in Yokohama, which was initially scheduled as Chono and Great Muta and Tenzan vs. Choshu and Tatsumi Fujinami and Genichiro Tenryu.
Kojima apparently suffered a concussion in his match on August 2nd, where he lost to Tenzan in the tournament and attempted to wrestle in a 6-man tag the next night. He collapsed in the ring during the match and was pinned by Akira Nagami, and he was taken out by a stretcher to the hospital.
Even though on paper the G1 shows didn't look anywhere close to the level of last year, reports we had were that all 3 shows were great, with most of the matches being good, and that Tenzan and Tadao Yasuda put on career performances.
One of the surprises was the Major League Pro Wrestling debut of Don Frye, who about 9 years ago did work a half-dozen or so indie dates in Arizona, facing Kazuyuki Fujita on August 2nd. This was reported as having the most heat of any match on that show. Fujita, a New Japan rookie whose credentials include being a Japanese national champion in amateur wrestling, got a tremendous crowd reaction for hanging in with Frye, particularly getting him in a submission where Frye needed a rope break. Frye made the comeback doing punches from the mount before using what I believe was a crooked head scissors for the victory at 6:40. However, Frye, who was managed by former pro wrestler Brad Rheingans, turned heel by refusing to break the hold until Naoya Ogawa hit the ring and started throwing kicks. The place went wild as Frye and Ogawa squared off until New Japan wrestlers pulled them both apart, but not before Antonio Inoki was in the ring as well. Frye faces former UFC fighter Cal Worsham at the Nagoya Dome, building toward a match with Ogawa that is scheduled to take place on January 4th at the Tokyo Dome.
There was also a 3-day-long storyline involving injured Shiro Koshinaka trying to get Tatsumi Fujinami and Kengo Kimura to join the depleted ranks to Heisei Ishgan.
This led to Kimura teaming with Nagami and Akitoshi Saito on August 2nd, and a match on August 3rd where Fujinami and Kimura and Nagami beat Kojima and Manabu Nakanishi and Junji Hirata. Also on August 3rd in the undercard, Tatsuhiro Takaiwa got the biggest win of his career in a non-title match, beating J-Crown champion El Samurai in 1642 to set himself up for a future title match. The G1 first-round matches on August 1st saw Kojima pin Steve Regal in 9:45 with a diamond cutter, Tenzan pinned Yasuda in 10:39 with a moonsault. Norton pinned Hirata with a power slam in 6:31, Chono beat Ohara with a chicken wing and crossface submission in 18:39. Muta pinned Manabu Nakanishi in 10:25 after a Frankensteiner off the top rope, and Hashimoto beat Kazuo Yamazaki in 11:25 with the armbreaker. Yamazaki didn't tap out, but ref Masao Hattori stopped the match. In a weird story that we don't have a lot of details on at press time, Carlos Maines, at one time the most powerful wrestling promoter in Mexico, and Manny Guzman, who headed what at the same time was the most powerful pro wrestling union ever, were both kidnapped on July 25 after a house show in Nezahualcóyotl that Maines had promoted. The two were still missing as of press time, 10 days later. It is believed that robbery was the motive, and the only clues released in the local press are that somebody used Maine's ATM card and withdrew all the money they could at one time the next day. At that point, when Maine's wife reported him being missing, when the card was attempted at being used a day or two later, the ATM machine ate the card. There have been no ransom notes nor any hints as to motive. It is not believed to be pro-wrestling related, although in the wrestling war environment in Mexico, of course there are plenty of rumors pointing fingers at Maine's various promotional rivals. Maine's is the main promoter of the Universal Wrestling Alliance, which formed in the mid-70s. Within a few years, generally booked around Connect beating foreign menaces to keep his world heavyweight title, it became the top organization in Mexico City. During its peak years in the early 80s, Maine's ran 2 shows per week at El Toreo in Naucalpan, an 18,000-seat bullring which became known as the Madison Square Garden of Mexico, and during its heyday that was possibly the most successful wrestling arena of all time, drawing an estimated 1 million fans during a calendar year. However, running with the same headline talent and booking the same plots with the same screw job finishes year and after year without change saw USWA fall almost off the face of the earth to where it barely survives today and has virtually no name talent. Guzman headed the Wrestlers Union and at one point was considered one of the 2 or 3 most powerful players in the Mexican wrestling industry, although in recent years he was booted out of the union for improprieties and hasn't been a main figure in the industry. For the first time in its nearly 5-year history, Extreme Championship Wrestling broke the 2,000 mark for a house show with a crowd estimated at 2,200 in a 2,500 capacity building on August 2 in Monaca, Pennsylvania Golden Dome. ECW had come close to the 2,000 mark on several occasions: the previous show in Monaca, the 2 recent shows in Buffalo, and the debut card in Scranton. The crowds for the promotion across the board are at a new level, largely built around Sabu and Rob Van Dam as the top heels, feuding with Sandman, who is still out with a series of injuries including but not limited to cracked and bruised ribs and a broken bone in his foot, and Tommy Dreamer and angles from Philadelphia involving Rick Rude, Jerry Lawler, and Jim Cornette, the latter 2 whom haven't appeared on these near record-setting houses. The top drawing match in Monaca, however, was Terry Funk, as a heel, defending the ECW title against local favorite Shane Douglas. Funk sent in strong heel promos that aired on the ECW show in Pittsburgh and worked total heel style in the match. According to one report, it was the best ECW match since the 6-man tag team match with the Michinoku Pro Wrestlers on the April 13th pay-per-view show. Funk won the match due to outside help from Sabu, which likely will eventually build to a rematch of the match that put the promotion on the map several years ago, the night the line was crossed with Funk, Douglas and Sabu battling nearly 60 minutes with no falls taken. At the Monaca show, Paul Heyman made the announcement that the 3rd ECW pay-per-view show, which will be the November to Remember on November 29th, will be coming from Monaca, Pennsylvania. Heyman had a meeting on July 31st at Titan Towers with Vince McMahon, Bruce Pritchard, and Jim Ross, basically opening up the closed lines of communication. While nothing definite, as far as a date and an angle was confirmed, McMahon apparently told Heyman that if he had any ideas on angles that would benefit both companies to present them to him, and both sides talked a lot about the September 22nd live Raw show from Madison Square Garden, but saying that ECW will definitely be part of that show appears at this point to be premature, but certainly a possibility. Most likely nothing of that nature would happen before the MSG show, so Heyman won't be able to get last-minute WWF exposure to attempt to bolster the buy rate of his August 17th pay-per-view show. The war of words, with each side calling the other liars in regard to every aspect of the breakup, of Heyman's not doing the shotgun show as WWF said he had agreed to do, and of the Steve Austin video with the brief ECW clip, will apparently slow down for a few weeks as both are allies against the common WCW enemy. Sources in the WWF claim Heyman had been on the WWF payroll for quite a while before the relationship cooling off when, from the WWF side, Heyman no-showed the June 30th show in Des Moines, Iowa, where he was scheduled to start as the color commentator on Shotgun Saturday Night. The WWF had claimed Heyman had told them to keep that news quiet because he didn't want his wrestlers finding out before he told them himself. He then never told them and never showed up either in Des Moines or for the voiceovers. Heyman still insists he never agreed to do it and even still claims it was never even brought up to him beforehand. According to other WWF sources, while most of the key people in the organization were soured at the conduct of Sabu and Rob Van Dam at the Detroit taping, The door has not been shut to potentially doing business with them again should WWF find it beneficial.
The pay-per-view lineup for Hardcore Heaven on August 17th has pretty well been finalized conceptually but not in actuality for the 1,800-seat Fort Lauderdale, Florida War Memorial Auditorium.
The lineup at this point is Funk vs. Douglas for the ECW title, Lawler vs. Tommy Dreamer, Sandman vs. Sabu and Taz vs. Chris Condito for the TV title. While not officially announced, the plan is that the Dudleys will end up with the belts because Mustafa will be unable to wrestle, and then defend the titles on the pay-per-view against PG-13. Expect New Jack and John Cronus to get together in some form at the show and be involved in that match probably as a run-in, since it's also questionable whether JC Ice of PG-13 will be available since he's out of wrestling for a few more weeks due to personal problems.
Right now Van Dam is scheduled against Balls Mahoney, although there are plans where Van Dam may beat an outsider wrestler. Names like Marty Jannetty and Tommy Rogers have been talked about earlier in the show, leading to Mahoney issuing the impromptu challenge.
The other match will be Bam Bam Bigelow vs. Spike Dudley. The rap band Insane Clown Posse is scheduled to perform at the open of the show and give the group more pub since ICP has another Howard Stern show appearance coming up this week. However, if Sandman can't work the show, several of the matches will end up being rearranged.
With Sandman out and Lawler now off the card, the August 9th ECW Arena show has been changed with the 6-man main event dropped. The main event will now be Funk vs. Sabu in a barbed wire match, plus Dreamer vs. Van Dam and Condito vs. Mahoney. While this match hadn't been confirmed at press time, Heyman was going to attempt to bring in Brian Christopher for this show to face Taz. Puerto Rico. The biggest weekend of the year with the 24th anniversary shows will be on August 13th in Humacao, August 14th in Ponce, August 15th in Bayamon and August 16th in Mayagüez. The only matches we know of are in Ponce a match with Ejército de la Justicia, the Justice Army, versus Devastation Incorporated, which is the heel group, plus Mark and Chris Youngblood versus Los Pastores, Sheep Herders, Carlos Colon versus Abdullah the Butcher, Lale versus Golden Boy, Chiqui Star, and La Tigresa versus Luna Vachon. Matches announced for Bayamon are Colon versus Abdullah the Butcher in a match where the loser supposedly has to retire from wrestling. Fat chance? And I guess that's the apropos remark about the match since Butcher will probably lose. Negro Casas and Atlantis versus Apollo Dantes and Emilio Charles Jr. Tahiti and Cujillo defend the WWC tag titles against the Youngbloods and Luna versus Tigresa. The Colon Butcher retirement match was set up on July 11th in Bayamon before about 1,850 fans when Butcher got a pin on Colon in a no DQ match due to outside interference from Los Pastores. On that same show, Invader No. 1 suffered a legit eye injury when Los Pastores were doing an angle with him with a flagpole and accidentally stuck it in his right eye and tore his retina. Over the past 3 weeks, Invader has had to undergo 4 different surgeries. On television, Chiqui Star brought out Golden Boy to prove they were 2 different people since Star had a loser must retire match to Colon. Lale, who doubles as a local police officer, came out and pointed out that the new Golden Boy was fake and smaller than the real one. Lale then challenged the real Golden Boy to a hair versus mask match when Star, Rico Suave and Victor the Bodyguard attacked him and cut some of his hair off, and they accepted the challenge. The television angle in regard to the vacant Universal title is they are claiming there are tournaments going on around the world. He claimed the winner from Japan and the winner from Mexico would wrestle and the winner of that match would come to Puerto Rico to face the winner of the United States tournament against the winner of the Puerto Rican tournament. They first announced Skip of the Bodydonas as the winner of the U.S. tournament, but then announced Skip was injured and that the second place winner would represent the U.S. in Joe DeForia, a Florida indie wrestler who has some shoot fights upcoming. They claim DeForia has competed in UFC, which isn't true. DeForia was brought in for a match a few weeks ago against the Puerto Rican winner, Ray Gonzalez, who it appears is being groomed to win the whole thing. EMLL. The August 1st show at Arena Mexico drew 3,500 with the highlight being an elimination tag match with Negro Casas and Ultimo Dragon and La Fiera and Felino and Shocker versus Dr. Wagner Jr. and El Satanico and Bestia Salvaje and El Io del Santo and Scorpio Jr. Most of the focus of the match was Casas and Felino versus Wagner and Santo. Santo and Wagner destroyed Casas and were both disqualified and eliminated, but then Casas was pinned by Salvaje. Afterwards, Santo and Wagner were destroying Casas outside the ring, and Felino ran out to help his brother and was counted out. They brawled backstage and fans could see Casas unmask Santo and rip up his mask, and he got a huge pop coming out from backstage, holding the mask. Satanico and Dragon then did a double pin, eliminating each other,
leaving Fiera and Salvaje as the final two, with Salvaje getting DQ'd for hitting ref Babe Richard. Match went about 25 minutes and was said to have been really heated, although as you can tell most of the finishes were screw jobs. Main event saw Atlantis and Mr. Niebla and Rayo de Jalisco Jr. over Kevin Quinn and Apollo Dantes and Emilio Charles Jr. when Atlantis pinned Quinn in the third fall. An entire crew from WCW including Neil Pruitt and Mike Tenay was in Mexico City this past week doing interview features with wrestlers from this group, both to sell the importance of the mask, so theoretically American fans will better understand and buy mask versus mask matches if WCW holds them or promotes them on Lucha PPVs next year, and get fans familiar with the wrestlers from this group. There is no date nor any wrestlers from EMLL that are confirmed as coming to WCW. Rey Mysterio Jr. and Rey Mysterio were also part of the piece. They spoke to El Hijo del Santo about his mask and talked about his 1994 When Worlds Collide match with Love Machine and Eddie Guerrero. As you can imagine, there was the expected heat from Conan and the Promo Azteca crew, since besides Mysterio Jr., none of them were included in the taping, and the WCW crew went to Arena Mexico on August 1st rather than going to the Promo Azteca show in Xochimilco, which was actually the strongest lineup on paper the company had put for a television taping. Top Win Promotions switched affiliation from AAA because they weren't drawing, to CMLL, booked by Mano Negra, but still weren't drawing and ended up canceling its show on August 3rd, scheduled as Taka Michinoku and Brazo de Plata and Felino versus Charles Jr. and Salvaje and Gran Marcus Jr. on top. It now looks like Top Win will try and affiliate itself with Promo Azteca. Wagner Jr. had a defense of his CMLL light heavyweight title against Ricky Santana on August 3rd at Arena Coliseo. Promo Azteca. The only details we have on the August 1st television taping from Xochimilco is that it was a sellout of about 3,000. Main event was Conan and Hector Garza and La Parca and Lizmark Jr. versus Silver King and Dandy and El Texano and Black Warrior. The semifinal saw the Azteca debut of Mr. Aguila, who was immediately put into a feud with Juventud Guerrera. Aguila and Super Calo and Zorro and Tarzan Boy lost to Jerry Estrada and Pirata Morgan and Guerrera in Pantera del Ring. Rey Mysterio Jr., who is still out of action with his knee injury, came to the ring with Aguila and endorsed him, saying that Aguila, who is 17, would be the wrestler that will take high flying to the next level. After the match, Guerrera was remarking that he's never seen a wrestler of that age and experience level work so well. Super Astro from EMLL and Team Yables Jr. from AAA are said to be on the verge of jumping. The plan right now is for this promotion to expand into Colombia. The Palacio de los Deportes 30,000 capacity show, headlined by Rey Mysterio Jr. versus Psicosis in a mask versus mask match along with Lizmark Jr. versus Black Warrior in a mask versus mask, has been pushed back to sometime in September due to Mysterio Jr.'s injury. Antifaz del Norte beat Pirata Morgan on July 27th in Monterrey in a hair match. Torero, as expected, did win the Mexican welterweight title from Nigma on July 25th in Cuautitlán, while Pantera became the first IWRG Intercontinental Middleweight Champion, beating Tony Rivera on July 27th in Naucalpan. Conan, Silver King, Texano, Aguila and Parca were on Hora Mexico, a popular Saturday morning radio show in Mexico City, on August 2nd. Aguila said he jumped because he wanted to get into the United States, but then said how now that he's jumped that WCW won't use him. Eric Bischoff won't use Black Warrior or Aguila unless they are booked through Paco Alonso, and said that he's now trying to get into the WWF. EMLL television announcer Dr. Alfonso Morales wrote a scathing article about Conan Innovaciones, Mexico City's leading sports newspaper. The article brought up Conan's various arrests around the country for fighting with fans, brought up how Conan has sued Ricardo Reyes for alleged death threats and tried to make fun of a pro wrestler filing a lawsuit against a non-wrestler, and called him kid steroids. AAA. Only thing we have is that the biggest show of the week was July 31st in Aguascalientes, with a main event of Connect and Octagon and Heavy Metal beating Cibernetico and Cobarde Jr. and a surprise wrestler, who turned out to be Babeface via DQ and Maniaco, Hysteria, and Mosco de la Merced, hit the ring and attacked the Faces. Face was a good worker as I recall, but that recollection goes back to around the year 1981 and he wasn't any spring chicken then, so he must be positively ancient by now. The only other newcomer on the show was Vegas, who formerly wrestled as Gitano for Azteca. All Japan. Giant Baba announced the next tour from August 17th in Toto through September 6th at Budokan Hall. The Budokan show will be headlined by Mitsuharu Misawa defending the Triple Crown against Jun Akiyama,
which will be Akiyama's first title challenge and first singles Budokan main event.
The other matches announced are Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Tao and Tomohiro Honda vs. Steve Williams and Gary Albright and Yoshihiro Takayama, Hiroshi Hase vs. Tatsuo Nakano and Kenta Kobashi and Kentaro Shiga vs. Hayabusa and Jinsei Shinzaki from FMW. The August 26th show at Sapporo Nakajima Sports Center has Williams and Albright making their first tag team title defense against Misawa and Akiyama, plus Kobashi vs. Hiroshi Hase in their first ever meeting, and Kawada and Tao and Takao Mori vs. the Lacrosse and Takayama and Nakano.
Nakano, a former UWFI wrestler who has been an indie worker since quitting UWFI before it folded, makes his All Japan debut on August 17th and will work this entire tour. He challenged Albright to a match, but that won't take place this tour. Kind of surprising to see him join this group since he's really short and this group has always been based around taller wrestlers. The two Korakuen Hall dates are August 22nd and August 23rd.
First night Kawada and Tao and Honda vs. Williams and Albright and Takayama, Misawa and Akiyama and Satoru Asako vs. Kobashi and Johnny Ace and Johnny Smith. Yoshinari Ogawa defends the PWF Junior title against Monokia Mossman. Stan Hansen vs. Giant Kimala 2 and Hase and Shiga vs. Nakano and Daisuke Ikeda. The second night has Misawa and Akiyama and Mossman vs. Kawada and Tao and Shiga, Kobashi and Ace, and Smith vs. Williams and Lacrosse and Takayama, and Hase and Honda vs. Hansen and Amori.
July 20th television show did a 3.7 rating, while the July 27th show, which would have been the Misawa Tao Triple Crown match from 2 nights earlier at Budokan Hall, did a 3.5 rating.
New Japan. Besides the major shows on August 10th at the Nagoya Dome and August 31st at Yokohama Arena, this group is down until the next tour from September 11th to September 23rd, which is traditionally one of the big tours of the year.
That tour will include major shows on September 17th at Osaka Mice Arena, September 20th at Nagoya Aichi Gym, which will be a hard building to fill coming 5 weeks after the Nagoya Dome, and the big show on September 23rd at Tokyo Budokan Hall. 2 matches were added this week to the Nagoya Dome show. Prelims were Kendo Kashin vs. Kazuyuki Fujita and Tatsuhito Takaiwa and Takashi Iizuka and Osamu Kido and Tadao Yasuda and Junji Hirata vs. Akitoshi Saito and Michiyoshi Ohara and Akira Nagami and Tatsutoshi Goto and Kengo Kimura. There may be an angle in that match since Ohara and Goto are likely to leave high for NWO.
The top of the Nagoya Dome show will air in a special Saturday afternoon 4:30 to 5:30 time slot on August 17th.
Because of the Nagoya Dome, the G1 tournament won't start airing on television until September.
There is something of a weird irony in the Steve Austin injury coming from a Tombstone piledriver. In 1992, in a match with this promotion with Austin challenging Chono for the NWA title, Austin used the same move on Chono and Chono was dropped wrong and ended up screwing up his neck, and he's physically never been the same since.
Chono was actually one hell of a worker up to that point and since then has had to rely more on picking his spots because he can't take a lot of bumps.
He's managed to not make his limitations obvious because of his great ring psychology, but if you watch him in tags and 6-mans, you'll see Tenzan always carrying the bulk of the matches, and you'll see how much he gets out of little things when he has to work singles.
July 25th TV show did a 2.7 rating.
Other Japan notes. Pancrase announced one of its strongest lineups of the year for September 6th at Tokyo Bay NK Hall, headlined by Yuki Kondo defending the King of Pancrase title against Jason DeLucia.
In ranking matches, Masakatsu Funaki puts the number 1 ranking contendership up against Guy Mesger, his first match since his UFC victory. Minoru Suzuki, who was originally thought to be out of action for the rest of the year with reconstructive knee surgery, puts the number 6 ranking up against Keiichiro Yamamiya, who won the Neo Blood tournament on July 20th. Asami Shibuya puts the number 7 ranking up against Boss Rutan, and Kyuma Kunyoku puts the number 3 ranking up against the debuting John LeBay, 29, a highly ranked NHB fighter with a 3-1-1 record, which includes an IFC tournament victory,
a win over Frank Shamrock in Hawaii, a draw with Igor Zinoviev, and a loss to Kevin Jackson. Jason Godse, coming off his upset win over Kondo in a non-title match, faces Yoshiki Takahashi. There have been discussions with both Tom Erickson and Marco Ruiz about joining this company.
Actually, in the case of Erickson, he actually would have debuted on this show, except the World Freestyle Wrestling Championships are just a few days earlier and he wouldn't have had proper time to get used to the new rules, so there is a good chance he'll start on the next major show.
Ruiz now lives in Los Angeles, where Pancrase has an office, and teaches martial arts in a dojo with Rutan, who has also moved to the United States. Upcoming rings shows after the August 13th show in Kagoshima will be September 26th in Sapporo, headlined by Fulcon vs Kiyoshi Tamura, which is the group's best matchup, and Yoshihisa Yamamoto vs Yuri Korkagin. The Mega Battle 97 tournament first round will be on October 25th from Tokyo Bay NK Hall, and the second round will be November 20th from Osaka Chuo Gymnasium. All Japan women have a big Korakuen Hall show called Super Maniacs Never Ending Bout on August 10th, with the final meeting of Asia Kong vs WWWA champ Kyoko Inoue in a non-title match. The show will also crown the Japan Grand Prix champion, who will get a title shot at the Kyoko vs Yumiko Hata winner on August 20th at Budokan Hall later in the year. The tournament continues throughout this week, and they'll have matches with Manami Toyota vs Mima Shimoda and Kaoru Ito vs Tomoko Watanabe on the August 10th show that no doubt will end up determining the top 2-point getters who will wrestle at the main event. 19-year-old Kyoko Hamaguchi, coming off her recent win in the heavyweight class at the World Women's Freestyle Wrestling Championships, will do an amateur match on the August 20th Budokan Hall show against Reiko Sumitani, who won the championship this year in the Asian Freestyle Tournament. They are pushing that Hamaguchi will wear her father's ring robe to the ring. The All Japan Amateur Wrestling Association ruled that it would be okay for Hamaguchi to maintain her eligibility to do professional shoot matches under judo or martial arts rules. FMW ran a major show on August 2nd at the Outdoor Shiodome in Tokyo before a sellout 3,750 headlined by a no-rope explosive electrified barbed wire match where Wing Kanemura beat Masato Tanaka in 13:05. The win puts Kanemura in the main event on the September 28th Kawasaki Baseball Stadium show against Atsushi Onita in theory, although Onita has talked about doing a Hulk Hogan/Bret Hart heel turn before that card. The storyline is that Tanaka received cuts in 74 different places on his body during the match from being blown up, not the kind of blown up associated with Mark Coleman 4 times. The next FMW big show in August 21st in Yokosuka with Kanemura and Haito defending the World Brass Knucks tag titles against Mr. Genosuke and Hiskatsu Oya plus Hayabusa and Jinsei Shinzaki versus the Gladiator and Super Leather. Former UFC fighters Paul Verhoeven's and Orlando Veit both did jobs on the July 29th Kingdom show at Tokyo Yoyogi Gym before 3,300 fans. Verhoeven's lost to Yoji Anjo in 6:22 via knockout in the main event, and Sakuraba used a choke sleeper on Veit. Big Japan's tour continued this week with major shows on July 31st in Tokyo and August 3rd in Osaka. In Tokyo, in what was billed as a lumberjack match under Vale Tudo rules, think about the silliness of that one, Great Pogo beat Shinya Kojika. Kojika had Pogo in a Fujiwara armbar when Pogo Shadow V, who had worked the tour up to that point as Grand Sheik, actually El Paso, Texas-based luchador Ari Romero, threw powder in Kojika's eyes and Pogo pinned him with a lariat. Exactly what you'd expect to see every day under Vale Tudo rules. Main event saw Yoshihiro Tajiri and Seiji Yamakawa retain their Big Japan tag titles, going to a 60-minute draw with Gedo and Jado. In Osaka, Pogo beat Shoji Nakamaki in the main event. Michinoku Pro continued to draw poorly all week with Great Sasuke not on the shows. They'll likely bring him back soon. Former SMW wrestler Bobby Blaze is currently on tour, while on August 12th, Oriental and Superboy will arrive. JD ran Korakuen Hall on August 3rd before about 1,500 fans with a triple headliner. The finale was a hair versus hair handicap match with Linus Asuka facing young girls Miyuki Sagabi, 17, and Yuko Kasugi, 17. The rule was if Sagabi and Kasugi can't last 5 minutes, they have to either join Asuka's group or shave their heads. They only lasted 2:32. Asuka said she didn't want Sagabi in her heel group, so she shaved her head. Kasugi didn't get her head shaved, as instead the owner of the promotion, who was also feuding with Asuka in one of those kind of angles, had Asuka shave his head. Asia Kong worked the show beating Kuga Miori Kamiya, who before her masked days worked AJW with Kong, while Jaguar Yokota and Devil Masami reformed their tag team beating rookies Megumi Yabushita and Sumi Sakai. USWA. There was little mention of ECW this week, as the show was geared toward promoting the August 8th show in Memphis. Since ECW has a show in Warwick, Pennsylvania the same night, none of the talent was available to work the show here. Actually, there was no direct ECW mention on television, although PG-187 and JC Ice were wearing ECW t-shirts. The lineup for Memphis is Paul Diamond vs. Tony Williams, Rex King vs. Mike Samples, Rod Price vs. Rick Titan, formerly Razor Ramon, Wolfie D, and PG-187 challenging Stephen Dunn and Flash Flanagan. A triangle match for the USWA title with Doomsday. It probably will be someone other than Glenn Jacobs under the mask. Maybe just for this match, Brian Christopher and Spellbinder, and the main event has Jerry Lawler defending the unified title against Dutch Mantle, with Mantle putting up all the hair on his head and on his body, so you can pretty well guarantee a title change.
Ramon announced he wanted to be known as Rick Titan and said he was done with the WWF.
He threw his Razor Ramon clothes into a garbage can. Diamond turned full-fledged heel, challenging Dunn and Flanagan to a tag team match, saying that he had a mystery partner, who turned out to be Rex King, Dunn's longtime tag team partner. King came out under a mask as Mr. X, and then after King and Diamond won, he pulled the mask off. They did an angle to restart the Doug Gilbert vs. Christopher feud.
Gilbert said that he pulled himself out of the triangle match because he didn't want to wrestle Christopher since they were friends.
Christopher had a TV match against PG-187, which wound up with PG throwing powder. PG was pounding on the blinded Christopher, which saw Gilbert hit the ring for the save. However, Christopher gave Gilbert a DDT, which caused the two to start pushing each other. The actual reason Gilbert isn't working the show this week is that he suffered a separated shoulder earlier in the week.
Samples appears to be on the way to a face turn to feud with Price after Price used a chain to beat him in a television match.
Here and there. Since we've gotten quite a few calls about the Terry Funk WrestleFest show on September 11th in Amarillo, Texas, for information and reservations for those from out of town, the box office number is 806-376-7767.
They will also be hosting for out-of-towners a beer and barbecue event at Funk's Double Cross Ranch.
Due to program content, even with a cleaned-up tape being sent, the ECW tape that will air on local Channel 4 for the 6 weeks leading to the show will air at 1 a.m. on Saturday nights.
WWO will be running an afternoon show on August 10th in Watsonville, California at the fairgrounds with Mil Mascaras and Conan and Mascara Sagrada vs. Yokozuna, which would be his first match back since the weight loss, and Yokozuna, Samoan Savage aka Sam Fatu, and Evil Clown, Matt Osborne, Silver King and Rey Mysterio, and Hector Garza vs. La Parca and Psicosis and Damien, Super Kaloa and Lizmark Jr. and Black Warrior vs. Juventud Guerrera and Halloween and Misterioso in a lumberjack match, Mini Rey Mysterio Jr. and Ultimo Dragoncito vs. Damiencito and Espectrito, and a women's match with Metallica, the niece of Rey Mysterio and Natasha, Barbara Blaze vs. Cassandra and Alondra, Victoria Moreno. Not sure about the Mini since Mini Ray and Espectrito have jumped to EMLL and have signed U.S. contracts with WWF, where they'll probably go under their former names of Mascara Sagrada Jr. and Mini Vader. WWO will also run shows on August 23rd at the San Diego Sports Arena and August 24th in Pico Rivera, California at a bull ring.
As if Gary Wolfe, Pit Bull #1, didn't have enough problems in life. He was working an indie show for Dennis Coraluzzo in Yardville, New Jersey on August 2nd in a cage match with Buddy Landel as a replacement for Doug Gilbert, who missed the show due to a separated shoulder. Coraluzzo contacted the Pit Bulls about working the show since ECW isn't using them anymore since the indictment. During the match, Landel accidentally did a move that screwed up Wolf's patella, and it looks like he's going to need major knee surgery. I'm trying to figure out the difference in Coraluzzo using the Pit Bulls and Heyman using them. Police in Denver are considering the death of longtime area wrestling promoter Gene Reed as a murder, as Reed was apparently robbed and beaten when he was found dead in his home. Emile Dupree was running a 7-night-a-week territory in the Maritimes for the summer, which was supposed to include the debuts of WWF trainees Glenn Kulka, former Canadian Football League star with the Saskatchewan Rough Riders, and Randy Blackbeard. Rip Rogers was booking the territory using Bad News Allen and Rick Martel as the top draws. Dupree shut the territory down early because he'd been losing money promoting 7 nights a week without television, although there was talk he was going to reopen using local wrestlers, women and midgets. Kulka left the territory for a family emergency and Dupree didn't want him back. Blackbeard was then let go. The Rock and Roll Express drew a crowd of 528 in Humble, Texas on August 2nd, although Ricky Morton ended up no-showing the event. Rob Russin's IWA has a show on August 15th in Kannapolis, North Carolina at the baseball stadium with lots of 70s and 80s major names announced. The main event is Greg Valentine, with Johnny Valentine in his corner against masked superstar Bill Eadie. Ricky Steamboat will ref the match. In addition, the Road Warriors are scheduled against Vladimir Koloff and Nikolai Volkov with Ivan Koloff in their corner, Plusifa and Sika, Jimmy Snuka, and the ring announcer will be Stan Lane. NHB.
Early reports indicate UFC 14 doing in 0.52 buy rate, which translates with the small universe of just under 15 million homes to about 75,000 buys and a $660,000 company gross. The buy rate itself was up from the previous two shows, which is a good sign, but with the universe constricting so much due to requests not carrying the show, the actual number of buys was the lowest number ever. Even with all the costs slashing, that's probably still a money loser. The plans for now for October 17th are to do a show from Kazakhstan, although that is far from a definite.
The idea would be to have a heavyweight tournament featuring Carlos Barreto, Randy Couture and two Russians, and two super fights, one of which would be a title defense by Maurice Smith and the other would be a match with Vitor Belfort. Mark Coleman, who called his loss to Smith the greatest thing that could have ever happened to him later in the week, is looking to be involved against either of the two.
Coleman admitted his loss was due to blowing up and hitting the wall just 3 minutes in and said he concentrated too hard on heavy lifting and not enough on cardio. Dan Severn was offered the match with Belfort, but with Severn being booked doing both shoot fights and pro wrestling every weekend, he wouldn't have time to adequately train for such a dangerous opponent and said he couldn't accept the match until he had time to slow down his schedule.
Besides his traditional pro wrestling dates, Severn has upcoming shoot matches on August 16th in Amarillo, Texas, August 23rd in Guam, September 5th in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and a tentative booking on October 11th in Honolulu. The Baton Rouge date conflicts with a 10-day tour he had booked through Doug Gilbert with IWA in Japan from September 5th to September 15th, and it appears he's going to cancel the Japanese tour. A correction from last issue's report on the Coleman-Smith match. The match actually went 21 minutes, of 15 minutes regulation and 3 minutes overtimes, not 18 minutes as we had reported. We also incorrectly listed Smith's overall record as 2-0 when it's actually 3-0. The actual finish of the Mark Kerr-Daniel Bobish heavyweight final was Kerr winning by digging his chin into Bobish's eye, which caused Bobish to tap out. The technical UFC rules prohibit gouging the eyes rather than the rulebook prohibiting attacking the eyes, so technically that would be a legal move, although the rule should be reworded and it should be banned.
Referee John McCarthy did admit he blew a call in the Smith-Coleman match as Coleman was on his feet when Smith threw a kick that McCarthy called a penalty on, which he blamed on being out of position. CNN Sport Illustrated did a piece with Nick Charles during the week on the most recent UFC show, which I was told was not only a well-done piece but also a positive piece for UFC. Joe Moreira's wife went into premature labor during his fight with Yuri Volin, but she wasn't at the building in Birmingham but was watching the event from home on television. Tank Abbott was at the show and introduced to the crowd off television and got a large babyface reaction. That may mean they'll bring him back again. ECW. The president of Northern Kentucky University officially canceled the proposed August 30th house show on the campus. The reason for the cancellation largely stemmed from controversy that spread at the university after viewing a tape of the Eric Kulas incident from last November. The angle from the last ECW arena showed aired in its entirety on this past week's television show, and because of the twists and turns was the most involved and really the best angle of the past 3 shows' big angles. Sandman was at both shows over the weekend and announced to the crowd before the matches started why he wouldn't be appearing, and then they did quick angles. Rob Van Dam was cheered in his match against Balls Mahoney on August 1st in Rostraver, Pennsylvania. Both weekend shows were said to have been weak underneath, but since the crowd heat was good in both cities, it came off okay, and the final 2 matches on both shows were said to have saved the cards. In Monaca, Pennsylvania, Chris Condito came out to Taz music and dressed up as Taz in his match against Spike Dudley. WCW. Complete lineup for the August 21st Clash of the Champions TBS special from Nashville, Tennessee is the Giant and Diamond Dallas Page vs. Randy Savage and Kevin Nash, Ric Flair and Kurt Hennig vs. Conan and Six. Jeff Jarrett defends the U.S. title against Steve McMichael, Steiners vs. Chris Benoit and Dean Malenko. Unless plans change this week, that will be a tag team title match. Ultimo Dragon vs. Alex Wright for the TV title, Chris Jericho vs. Eddie Guerrero and Raven vs. Stevie Richards. The status of Steven Regal is questionable at press time. Regal was allegedly involved in some sort of disturbance on an airplane coming to the United States from Japan for the G1. We don't have details, but Regal allegedly caused a major disturbance in first class which caused the plane to make an emergency landing in Anchorage. A felony charge stemming from this could affect his working visa and cause him to be deported, which would cost him his job. Even if he's not deported, there was considerable internal speculation that his job was in jeopardy because of the incident, as the airlines don't react well to problems in the air that cause emergency landings.
Complete rundown of the August 4th Nitro from Auburn Hills. Hogan opened the show with an interview to hype the main event. Hennig pinned Mortis in 346 with a fisherman suplex. Hennig looked by far the best he is so far, which also shows how good a worker Mortis is. During this match, security confiscated a sign that read "China is the man." Jarrett and Malenko beat Chavo Jr. and Hector Guerrero in 451 when Dean used the cloverleaf on Hector. Really good match, particularly when Chavo Jr. was in with Malenko. Malenko acted like he didn't want to be around Jarrett and Deborah McMichael, and fans were already waiting for him to turn on them. They did another Raven and Richards skit.
Raven went to punch Richards, but Richards blocked it and said he'd never let Raven do that to him again. Raven smiled and walked off. Giant beat Lenny Lane and Scott D'Amore and Joey Maggs in 134 after choke slamming all three.
Public Enemy beat High Voltage in 513. The gimmick they were working is that Voltage was so green they were clueless and need guidance. Expect them to get a manager and then a push. Match was beyond awful.
Alex Wright kept the cruiser title, beating Scotty Riggs in 344 with a dropkick off the top rope. No heat at all.
Luger did an interview guaranteeing a title switch. Benoit beat Six via DQ in 401 when Jarrett attacked Benoit.
McMichael ran in and went after Jarrett, which got a good pop, and then Malenko saved Jarrett.
Match was great until the weak finish.
Booker T pinned Vincent in 47, after which Stevie Ray destroyed Booker.
Vincent sucks, literally, but it was short.
Wrath pinned Barbarian with the death penalty in 3 minutes.
Bad. Steiners introduced Ted DiBiase as their new manager. DiBiase nearly called the tag belts the WWF tag titles. Hall and Nash were on stage telling jokes about DiBiase, saying the only reason the Steiners wanted him was so they had someone who could read the menus to them in restaurants on the road. Conan beat Psychosis in 148 with a Tequila Sunrise. Mysterio Jr. came out limping. Conan kicked the crutch away and threatened him again.
Mysterio Jr. then used his other crutch to KO Conan and danced around, showing his knee was fine.
In actuality, his knee isn't fine, and there is some heat about him having to come back as soon as this week, as the company promised him 2 months off and cut it to 5 weeks. Plus, because of NITROS and the Mexico City trip for the documentary, he has to miss several days of rehab. Glacier and Ernest Miller beat Silver King and Damien in 325 when Miller pinned Damien after a kick off the top rope. Can you say style clash? Real bad. Eric Bischoff and J.J. Dillon had an interview confrontation with Bischoff using a line from an ancient movie called Billy Jack, so ancient that the wrestler who took the name from the movie at the start of his career is now 44 years old, saying he was going to kick Larry Zbyszko between the eyes, and Dillon laughed and left. Page beat Flair via DQ in 1031 when Hennig interfered. Page cleaned house on both of them. It was okay, but nothing more, as basically Flair did all his spots but they didn't build to anything. Villanos beat Garza and Lismark Jr. in 457 when Villano 4 pulled a switch and pinned Lismark with an inside cradle. Solid work with some good flying, but by 2.5 hours into the house show the crowd was wanting bigger names. Mike Tenay acknowledged Villanos 1 and 2 are no longer wrestling. It would be hard for Villano 2 to be wrestling as he's been dead for years, but I guess using the word dead would be too controversial for a pro wrestling show, and said 3 is still active in Mexico. Dillon then came out with a contract for Sting to wrestle Curt Hennig, but Sting ripped it up and left.
There were a decent amount of boos for Sting at that point.
The storyline is that Dillon will bring out a contract for guys each week higher up on the food chain, eventually leading to Hall and then Nash, and Sting will continually rip it up and leave until they get to Hogan, when Sting will sign. From the timing of everything, you think they can only stretch it until October's Havoc show, but I'm still told the plan is for the match to be at the new Washington, D.C. arena in December. Finale saw the Hogan-Luger title switch, complete with a great post-match celebration with tons of baby faces, and even a few heels celebrating together.
Nobody was more excited about the title change and celebrating more than ref Scott Dickinson.
They showed Hogan throwing tables in the other dressing room after losing. Weekend ratings saw main event at 1.1 and Saturday night at 2.0. Pro was preempted. Tickets for the September 20th show at the San Francisco Cow Palace go on sale on August 15th.
Lineup is Luger and Giant vs. Hall and Nash, Page vs. Savage in a death match, Steiners vs. Harlem Heat, Hennig vs. Jarrett, Malenko vs. Eddie Guerrero, Ultimo Dragon vs. Alex Wright, and Conan vs. Mysterio Jr. It's now more likely than Hennig will wind up as a horseman. They were already advertising house shows with Flair vs. Hennig main events for after the Clash, when the turn was scheduled, but those matches have since been pulled from the cards.
Where that leaves Malenko, I don't know. The plan is also at some point for Arnold Anderson to take on the old J.J. Dillon role as Horseman spokesperson, and there is still talk of involving Medusa with the group as well. Medusa is now said to be engaged to Ken Blackman of the Cincinnati Bengals. Ted DiBiase's book, Everyone Has a Price, is supposed to come out this month and he's going on a tour to promote it. The book is his autobiography with heavy religious overtones, how the money he made in the WWF nearly ruined his life, etc. WCW put tickets on sale for 11 cities this past week. The biggest first days were the Nitro on September 29th in Worcester, Massachusetts, which sold 6,700 tickets for $157,000 on the first day, and the September 7th house show in Chicago, which sold 5,600 tickets for $94,000. Nitro on September 8th in Milwaukee has already topped $112,000 in advance. Clash on August 21st in Nashville has only sold 2,405 tickets for $49,000 at press time. Most of the Nitros are doing well, but some of the house shows aren't selling that well. Weekend house shows were August 2nd in Battle Creek, Michigan, which drew 2,056 paying $32,550, and August 3rd in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which drew 4,115 and $75,312. There were some major security problems in Grand Rapids involving Harlem Heat. The only other show of the week was the Saturday night tapings on July 30th in Gainesville, Georgia, which drew a sellout 1,800 paying $10,000. They were scheduled to tape 22 matches for August 9th and August 16th, but 11 matches into the taping a generator blew, and they couldn't fix it. Luckily they are a few weeks ahead in taping, so they can make it up at the next taping on August 12th in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and still have it done in time for the August 16th show. Nothing special happened at the taping. Among the things scheduled was for Stevie Richards to debut in the ring against Lenny Lane and for Brad Armstrong with a new haircut to return as a heel. While the generator blew out, they sent Paige and Hennig to work a match to get ready for the pay-per-view, and Paige scored the pin using Hennig's fisherman suplex as a finisher, and then did a diamond cutter for good measure afterwards. Flair and Hennig attacked Paige after until Giant made the save. Reggie Miller will be making an appearance at the September 6th house show in Indianapolis, which they already started building up on television. They may shoot an angle with he and Bobby Heenan, who started his wrestling career in the Indianapolis circuit more than 30 years ago, or when all those people and items he brings up today on Nitro were actually current. TV Guide in the Cheers and Jeers section this past week praised the Bash at the Beach pay-per-view in comparison to the Tyson Holyfield pay-per-view. Actually, that's a one-sided comparison to say the least. They claimed the show had more action, easily, lower price, inarguably, although they got the price wrong in the story, less blood, inarguable, a better ring announcer, in Michael Buffer, whose makeup or rep must have blinded or shut the hearing canals of whomever wrote that review, because Buffer doing wrestling can't hold a candle to Jimmy Lennon Jr. doing boxing. A better undercard, Tyson Holyfield undercard except for Christy Martin was a dud, better ring music and better nicknames. Obviously it's totally stupid to compare a shoot pay-per-view with a worked one, so naturally we're going to, but Tyson Holyfield I was more exciting than all but the best pro wrestling PPVs. WWF. Sid is scheduled to undergo surgery this week where they'll take bone from his hip to fuse his neck. The surgery would have kept him out of action another 3 months had he not been fired. He's contesting his termination and has hired a lawyer and threatened to sue the WWF for breach of contract. He's told friends that he thinks because of the legal threat that the WWF now wants him back, but he doesn't want to go back. Based on what we hear, WCW would be interested in him, but only on a per-show deal and not a long-term guaranteed deal because of his track record, and then only if people like Arnold Anderson approve of him coming in. What we've heard at this point for the September 7th pay-per-view show in Louisville, Kentucky called Ground Zero is Undertaker vs. Shawn Michaels. Brett defends the WWF belt against Patriot and a triple threat match with Savio Vega, Farouk and Crush, which is sure to be short, awful and with lots of interference. The other planned match was Austin and Dude Love vs. Owen Hart and Bulldog, which I'd assume would stay as planned if Austin is ready to work by that time. The September 20th one-night-only pay-per-view from Birmingham, England's NEC Arena is scheduled for a double main of Brett defending against Austin and Bulldog defending the European title against Michaels. The working idea now is to do 3 England-only pay-per-view events per year. Raw on August 4th drew a sellout 4,665 paying $69,009. Plus a whopping $40,444 in merchandise, all records for pro wrestling in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. They opened with the Hart Foundation interview and then introduced Sergeant Slaughter as the new commissioner. Slaughter and Jim Ross both mentioned the Patriot getting the title shot, which got little reaction. Patriot isn't over enough for that position on a card, and if this is where they were going with him, they needed to put him over Brett at the TV clean in the middle rather than make it a lucky fluke. It was a victory like when PJ Walker beat IRS that fans saw as Michaels causing a no-name to beat Bret rather than establishing Patriot as a force who actually could beat Bret if he got the chance. It's a mistake of not having people do clean enough jobs that WWF is making a lot on television, which is why a lot of people with potential to rise to the next level don't get there. And speaking of that, Shamrock beat Kama in 3:03 when Miguel Perez and Jesus Castillo gave Kama a double suplex on the floor and threw him in, and Shamrock used a belly-to-belly for the win. WWF is the company with the submission artist, but since he never beats anyone important by submission, WCW is way ahead in getting its audience to understand submissions, which in the long run can result in more dramatic matches with less injury risk. Match was bad, but they all were on this night. Except for Taka Michinoku over Brian Christopher in 3:28. They worked the match as if Taka was a rag doll with no chance at all, as he was just toyed with and Christopher didn't sell his offense at all. And as Christopher was beating him like a drum, out of nowhere he scored an inside cradle. After the match, Christopher beat him like a drum again. Granted, the loss didn't hurt Christopher a bit, but the win hurt Michinoku a lot. Helmsley double count out Vader in 2:14. Real bad. The only reason they were out there was to set up China dropkicking Paul Bearer, and the cameras didn't even get the shot. Patriot pinned Sultan with a full Nelson drop in 1:44. Bret and Patriot had a confrontation afterwards which resulted in a pull-apart. Michaels did his heel interview. Fans were booing him from the start, and booed him a lot more as he got going. Probably the best part about the entire show. Ahmed Johnson pinned Chains in 2:12 with the plunge. As mentioned earlier, a new standard for awful. Nation of Domination then turned on Johnson. Hey, didn't he just win? And injured his knee. Godwin's beat Headbangers in 3:50 when Henry slop dropped Mosh and Phineas pinned him. Crowd was dead. Match was a cluster. Bob Holly beat Pillman by a countout in 2:26 when Goldust and Marlena held up a bra and Pillman was so mad he got counted out. The gimmick is that Pillman has to wrestle every week in a dress until he wins. It's an old Knoxville gimmick that Jim Cornette knows well, and Pillman will likely lose via fluke several weeks in a row. I guess seeing the ridiculousness of Pillman wearing a dress is okay for 2 minutes, but certainly not any longer. Main event saw Dude Love over Owen Hart in 11:18 when Austin KO'd Hart with a slammy. Since Dude does none of the cactus mannerisms and crazy bumps, he wrestles like a second match guy. It was bad. Apparently Michael's knee is far worse than most people thought, including us. According to Dr. James Andrews, who is the most noted knee specialist in the country, he claimed from an exam this past week that Michael's knee is so bad that virtually any doctor would suggest he retire from wrestling. He has serious arthritis in the knee and his ACL is very close to going out. The belief now is that Michael's knee is such that he'll never be able to work a full-time wrestling schedule again, but he's going to be used on major arena shows and will mainly do interviews and angles on television with an occasional match. WWF's first 2 Tuesday Raw tapings are September 9th in Muncie, Indiana and September 23rd in Albany, New York. One thing that hasn't been brought up about the Tuesday tapings is that since they aren't live, they can be spruced up in post-production. Since everyone comments on which side gets the biggest crowd reactions, in post-production they can use the famous WWF heat machine from the 80s and create the illusion that wrestlers are over that aren't, which sometimes is effective in getting them over. Taka Michinoku was offered a contract this weekend but hasn't signed. 6 minis from Mexico, including the original Mascarada Sagrada Jr. and Espectrito, have signed. It's rumored Hysteria has also signed or is close to doing so. Rocky Maivia and Tom Pritchard, as Mr. X, were on the Maury Povich show on July 31st about someone whose fantasy was to become a pro wrestler. Maivia will be returning from his knee injury and they've already taped a series of interviews with him, all of the kind that got Goldust and Mankind over his faces, where he talks about his prior arrests and the like as a teenager. Real names of the members of the Truth Commission are Robert Millay, Interrogator, Barry Buchanan, Recon of course, and Luke Poirier, Sniper. Sniper is the former world champion from Europe known as Rambo in CWA. Working idea still seems to be to introduce Kane on the next pay-per-view. Weekend ratings saw Live Wire at 1.4 and Superstars at 2.1. Superstars beating WCW Saturday Night as the most watched wrestling show over the weekend, which one would think bodes well for the buy rate of Summerslam. It's the first time that's happened in more than a year. In the cable ratings, USA Network beat both TBS and TNT in prime time in July with a 2.2 to 2.0s for both Turner stations. The big increase for USA was attributed to its strong Sunday night lineup, which is based around the move of La Femme Nikita. For the year, TNT averages a 2.2 while USA averages a 1.9.
Jobber Marty Garner appeared on Montel Williams recently on a show based around people who had changed drastically since high school. They brought out a girl Garner had a crush on in high school who said he was a skinny geek in high school who couldn't buy a date. The show ended with him asking her out again, and this time she accepted. Network One replaced the Friday ECW show with WWF. WWF now claims that more than 100 different countries air its television, adding New Zealand and the Dominican Republic to make the total 101. They also claim Raw is War to be the highest-rated weekly television show in Kenya. Fanny Rosenberg, reported in the local papers as a pro wrestling icon as the stereotypical old lady in the front row in Winnipeg, passed away on July 25 at the age of 102. She started attending pro wrestling in the 30s and had only missed 5 house shows in Winnipeg in the past 20 years. A photo of Rosenberg on her 100th birthday is on the wall at Titan Towers. WWF is pushing a match with Maivia versus Farouk on August 8 in Miami as University of Miami, where Maivia played. We have reached the end of this issue. I truly hope you enjoyed the program. Be sure to like and subscribe. See you next time.